The Torah nonetheless refers to people and with the noun of medaber, the speaker, which is interesting, right? We're also referred to as mahalech, the mover, like the mover and groover, the shaker and baker, right? Yeah. You ever see Asaf on the court? He can move and groove and shake and bake, right? And can dunk that junk. So we're known as, right, the mahalech, the mover, and also medaber, the speaker. And so, and it's interesting that medaber really just means to communicate. So we're sort of the grand, in the larger scheme of life, we're the communicators. And we have this ability to communicate. It's usually done through speech, but it certainly doesn't have to be. Many of you know that I work with individuals with profound special needs, and they communicate very nicely with sign language, American Sign Language, or so this would be. So I just said to you, come in and kiss me goodnight. Okay, that was one of the earlier things I learned. Thank you, Asaf. Right? So, so there's all different ways to communicate, but so it really medaber, which is usually translated as speech, is really a way of saying communication. And so we know that all species communicate in some way or another. They communicate with each other, and there's even been studies, as we know, in the plant world, where trees are able to communicate with each other. If one is being attacked by a certain insect, it lets out this certain frequency, and other trees in the area know about it, and they start secreting this kind of sap to protect them against these insects. So nonetheless, what is the unique thing about the human species and how we communicate? So we're at this notion of medaber. So many people have discussed it, many philosophers all throughout the ages. I'm not really going to go into it. Some people say that, I think it was Nietzsche who said it was our ability to laugh, that we can laugh at ourselves and laugh at jokes and take things not so seriously. He felt that was the unique way that the human species communicates, which is really interesting, this ability to laugh. And we know that the importance of being besimcha, being joyful, in the Torah cannot be overstated, right? I remember I was just looking at something today where it says, that, can you hear me okay, guys? Give me a thumbs up. I know, okay, good. Where it says in the Talmud that we shouldn't go to pray, to tefillah, unless we're besimcha. We have to be happy. And that's why it says Jacob, when he was depressed for those 22 years, right, that he was separated from Yosef, and he had already accepted, albeit very reluctantly, that Yosef was no longer alive, but somehow inside he still couldn't accept it. And those 22 years, it says that the divine, the Shekhinah, the divine presence did not dwell in him directly like it did before. He didn't have this ability to see clearly and to do what the prophets would have, what we would call prophecy, to see into the future, that our forefathers and the mothers had that ability, but because they always served Hashem with simcha. They served Hashem with joy. So joy has this incredible power. So I wanted to share with you, to start off tonight with this story. Tonight is a special yahrzeit. It's really one of my favorite stories. I remember reading it years ago. We used to call this the White Book. And you remember when the Beatles came out with the White Album? Man, you guys are too young for that. But I remember when the Beatles' White Album came out, and it was just a white cover and sort of like almost like embossed on the cover. It just said the Beatles, and that was it. And it became known as the White Album. It was two albums in one. And Jay, I know as a Sap told me you're really into music. The White Album is Godless Shabba Godless. It's amazing stuff. So if you get a chance, check out Judo's White Album. Phenomenal. So I used to read these stories to my kids when they were growing up as like bedtime stories. And to this day, my kids will tell me, you remember that story that you told us about such and such? Well, I just want you to know it freaked me out for like 15 years. So here I'm thinking, I'm telling them, these wonderful bedtime stories about, the tzaddikim, from our culture. Some of them are like crazy stories. So this is one of my favorites. And it's a story of Reb Shlomo of Karlin. He was a famous Rebbe from Karlin. He was, his yahrzeit was today. His yahrzeit is today, in the year 1792. And he was in the middle of prayer, and there was a raid by the Cossacks, and they stabbed him with a sword, and he eventually passed away on this day in the year 1792 from his wounds. Before his soul left his body, before his neshama left, his students gathered around him, and they asked him, do you have anything to tell us? And he said to them, you should go visit the tzaddik of Nishkis, this one particular Rebbe who lived in the town of Nishkis. And so the Karlin Rebbe, Reb Shlomo of Karlin, he had a student who was known as the Malach, the angel. And they say it was an angel because he was this fiery kind of person. Some people say actually when he would daven, he would get so red, you would think fire was coming out of him. And so he was a heavy hitter. A very, intense kind of person. So he was out of town, comes back to Karlin, and he finds out that hold on a sec. I'm sorry if everybody could just mute, because there's kind of there's kind of a weird background noise. Let me just see something here. Sorry. I want to unmute. Okay. Yeah. So if everybody could mute, just because we hear could mute. I'm sorry. So anyhow, he his name was, interestingly enough, his name was Ori from the town of Strelisk, which was nearby to Karlin, but he had come to see his Rebbe, and his one second. Oh, I see, I can do that. Okay, let me see if that's better. Is that better? Okay, good. Okay, don't take it personally if I muted you, but there was some kind of weird noise going on. I got it. Okay, so thank you, Shoshana, for the message. You were spot on. Anyhow, he comes to Karlin. He finds out that his Rebbe was killed. He immediately sits on the ground. He rents his clothes in mourning, and then he asks his fellow students, "Did our Rebbe say anything before he passed?" And they told him. He said, "Yes, our Rebbe said we should go to the tzaddik of Nishkis, this town called Nishkis, this particular city." So this Ori was such a sincere chassid of his Rebbe, of Reb Shlomo of Karlin. He says, "Okay, if that's what the Rebbe told me," he gets up right on the spot, and he picks himself up and he starts traveling to Nishkis, which was a couple days' journey. He arrives in the town and he goes to see this particular tzaddik who lived there. And so he sees that the Rebbe is speaking, and it's a packed audience. The Rebbe's like in a big shul, and a fairly large town, and several hundred people there, and they were all crowded in, and the Rebbe's speaking. Obviously, you got to get close because there were no microphones. They didn't have Zoom in those days. And so he's looking on in. You forget this is the year 1792, and he's trying to look and see what's special about this guy, about this individual who his Rebbe told him to go visit. And suddenly he sees this guy coming from the back of the room, pushing everybody aside, and makes his way through the crowd, sort of knocking people over, knocking people away. And he comes up in front of this tzaddik, the tzaddik of Nishchiz, and he starts talking with him. So it says by tzaddikim that they're able to look at a person's face. And when they look at a person's face, they're able to see things about the person. And the Hebrew word for face is panim, which is related to the Hebrew word panimiot, which means the essence, the inside. So a person, the panim very often reflects the inside of a person. So that's why when somebody says to you sometimes, if we're going to chat, let's at least do, face to face. Let's chat on whatever the venues we can chat on today, but where we can see the person, because in a way, it's so much more meaningful. So you can see the little nuances in the person. You can see when they smile. You can see when a saf goes like this across the screen, right? And so all of these things reflect, and add to the conversation. But it says by tzaddikim that they're able to look at a person's face and to see the behavior of a person, to see what the person has done. So this Ori who was the chassid of Shlomo of Karlin, is now in this strange town. He's not really that familiar. He's heard of this particular Rebbe, but he was connected with his own Rebbe in a very deep way. And he sees this guy push through, and he stands right next to the tzaddik of Nishchiz, and they start talking. And Reb Ori sees on the guy's face, by looking at him, that he had just come from, let's just say, from doing a very serious aveira. He just come from doing a very serious offense. Okay, he had relations with a particular person that he should not have been having relations with, and he, it was like one thing after the other. It was a whole big thing in this guy's particular day. And I guess you could say one of the few things that he didn't do on that particular day, he didn't murder anybody. So he had tracked up a good record on that particular day. And now he's talking to this, this holy Rebbe over here. So Reb Ori couldn't take it. He was like, we just read the parsha of Pinchas, right? Where Pinchas, couldn't take it that two people were doing this big Chilul Hashem in front of Moshe, in front of the whole community. He takes a spear, he stabs them both, at the risk of his own life. Reb Ori couldn't take it. He sees this guy, and he's thinking, what kind of individual is this? Like, he doesn't even know who this guy is. Well, I'm going to go give this guy the old what for. So he starts making his way through the crowd, and he gets right in front of the tzaddik, this particular grubby sort of individual, and the Reb Ori is about to let him have it. The tzaddik looks up at him, and he says to him, "Who invited you here? Who the heck are you? Where did you come from? What are you doing here? Get out of here. Get out of here. Pick yourself up and get out of here." So he chases him away before he had a chance to say anything. So Ori leaves, and next door to this big synagogue was what they called the Beit HaMedrash, the house of study. And he goes in. There's nobody there because everybody is next door listening to this rabbi speak. And he sits himself down, and you can imagine this state of mind that this person was in. 2 days ago, he finds out that his Rebbe was murdered by the Cossacks. He schleps himself over to get to this town called Nishchiz, who knows if he ate, how much he drank, if anything. And so he's totally in this emotional turmoil. He comes in, he sees this going on. And so he just sits there and he's thinking, I'm going to go back to Karlin. Let me just catch my thoughts. Let me just, try to put this all together. I don't understand why my Rebbe sent me here. About a half hour goes by. The door opens up, and 1 second. About a half hour goes by. The door opens up, and in walks the tzaddik of Nishkez into this house of study, and he sees Ori is sitting there by himself. He sits down next to him, and he says to him, "Why are you here?" And he tells him that my Rebbe, Reb Shlomo of Karlin, who just passed away a few days ago, sent me here. So he said to him, "Do you know why your Rebbe sent you here?" He said, "No, to be honest with you, I have no idea." And I'm getting ready to go back now. Thanks for everything, thanks, but no thanks. So the Rebbe said to him, this tzaddik says to him, "Well, I will tell you why your Rebbe sent you to me." And he said like this. He said, "First of all, I want you to know that what your eyes saw, my eyes also saw. What your eyes saw, where this guy had come from, I saw the same thing that you did, okay? I saw his illustrious record of that particular day. I saw the same things that you did, okay? So let's put the cards on the table, okay? We're coming from the same spot as far as being able to see it." But then he told him like this: if you don't have love for another individual in your heart, for that it's not strong enough that when you see somebody who is involved in such a negative thing that you don't feel sorry for this person and you don't want to help them, then you have no love in your heart at all. Then you only have love in your heart for people who think like you, for people who act like you, maybe for people who even dress like you. But your Rebbe was sending you here that you should learn a little bit about Avas Yisrael and Avas Abrios, that I saw the same things you did, but I knew if I were to start yelling at him and pushing him away, I would push him further away from leading a good, healthy, wholesome life. So that's why your Rebbe sent you here, that you have to learn that lesson. And so when you see somebody, instead of burning up with fire like you're ready to chop this guy's head off, like a religious fanatic, you should that fire should kindle a love and a compassion in your heart to want to help this individual out. And maybe through all this, maybe you will help the person out, and maybe you will help the person to change for the better. So I just thought that was what an amazing story for this whole topic of what I wanted to share with you, which is that this idea of speech and how the Torah is so particular about it that we're even called, like the human condition, we're called medaber, the great communicator, the great speaker. And so how careful we have to be with our speech. The Torah, as many of you know, the Torah goes out of its way when it talks about the kosher animals and the treif animals, those we can eat and those we can't eat. We know very often the Torah, instead of saying it's impure, instead of using the word tameh, it will say she'ena tahora hi, that it's not pure, that this species is not pure. Why doesn't it save space, save letters? And instead of saying she'ena tahora hi, that it is not pure, that this thing is not pure, it should just say tameh, it's impure. So the commentaries teach us that the Torah is going out of its way to use what they call a clean language, a lashon naki, a clean language. And the only time it uses, I have a new guest here, huh? Maybe it's a reincarnation coming to learn some Torah. Oh man, that's awesome. See, everybody comes to the schmooze here. Nice. Well, welcome. We, by the way, since the whole quarantine and the whole, now some places are coming out of it. Florida was coming out. We're sort of going back in the other direction now. So wildlife has like really made a comeback. So like our yard, we've had family of raccoons walking around the edge of the pool. Now I'm talking about a 5 foot deep above ground pool, walking around that ledge, not one that's on the ground. And we've seen foxes in the neighborhood, which is crazy. This is North Miami Beach. It's not like, we're so in the woods here. So it's been really exciting. Like nature is really making a comeback, which is cool. So there's a lot of, there's many people have spoken about the importance of speech. So I don't want to get too sidetracked. We know the famous story about somebody went to a Rebbe and said, look, I spoke Lashon Hara. I spoke evil talk about somebody, and very negatively. And it says that when somebody talks negatively about somebody, this is what they call Lashon Hara, like wicked talk about somebody, that you end up killing three people. You kill the person you're talking about, the person who's listening, and the person who's speaking. Because what happens is all three people end up moving away from each other and from this particular individual. So we see that, okay, I got you. We see that, so they went to a rabbi, okay, rabbi, what should I do? So he told this individual, okay, here's a pillow, in the olden days, used to make it out of feathers. And he said, cut open the pillow, go outside, cut open the pillow, and then cast it off like this. So the wind disperses the feathers. And that will be your tikkun. That will be the way to fix up this sin of evil talk. The person comes back, says, okay, Rebbe, I did it. Okay, now the Rebbe says, okay, good. Now go out and collect every single feather. The person's like, what are you, crazy? I can't do that. I can collect some. I can't collect all of them. So the Rebbe said, that's the same thing with Lashon Hara. You never know where it goes, right? And who tells who, and who tells such and such, and what the end result is. And so it doesn't really do too much good. But I'm not here to talk about that. I wanted to share with you a few concepts, these things that have always bugged me. And I guess we'll start with one of the biggest ones ever since I first got interested in this whole Jewish business, this whole thing known as Yiddishkeit, Judaism, whatever. I was brought up somewhere between Reform and conservative, I guess, in Buffalo. Went to public school my whole life. Didn't start going to yeshiva until I was 23. And I just want, give you a little bit of background. So when I heard even back then that there's two general categories of the mitzvot, right? There's what they call the mitzvot aseh, the mitzvot that involve positive action, involve doing something. And those are known as the positive mitzvahs. Then the other mitzvahs are called the mitzvahs lo saseh. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, thou shalt not, keep away from this. And those are always referred to as the negative commandments. So to me, that even way back then, from the time I was 23, a few centuries ago, so they refer to it as the negative commandments. Now, I don't know about you, but I always felt like the word negative means something negative, right? What is conveyed about the message of negative? It's the opposite of positive, right? You have a magnet, you have the positive end, you have the negative end. So it always bugged me that they call it the negative commandments. And almost every English Torah reference guide, they will refer to the mitzvahs lo saseh, the mitzvahs lo ta'aseh, of these commandments that are always prefaced with lo ta'al ta'aseh, don't do. It almost always translated as the negative commandment. So I am urging everybody to write into your publishers, and I've come up with it's not really a new one, but I remember listening to when the quarantine first came out, and they said this is a time of social distancing. So I was thinking, wow, that is the song Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds. To everything, turn, 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 right? And they have, they say in the song, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. Ba-da-da-da-da. So they have right in there a time to embrace, but now we social distance. This is a time to refrain from embracing, right? And, you know, we all know how hard that is as human beings. Huh? Yeah, right. That's true. That is a, yeah, thank you. Yeah, Gittel just came in to tell me you got to quote the source. The source is not the birds, by the way. That is taken from Ecclesiastics, right? Koheles, which is from Shlomo HaMelech. Yeah, thank you, Gittel. Somebody got to set me on the straight and narrow here. But yeah, so that the beauty of that song is that those words from Kohelet became this hugely popular song by the Birds. If you get a chance, check it out. It's called Turn, Turn, Turn by the Birds. It's done fantastically well. And there they say a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. And we all know, we see people who we haven't seen in a while. Like I still don't go to, our synagogue is still doing this. They just reopened a few weeks ago, but you have to register and they don't want people to come who are really over 50. You know, everybody's afraid about it. And you're davening with a mask on and you're 10 feet apart. And I read the Torah and there's no way I'm reading the Torah with a mask on. As it is, I can barely breathe with it. You know, so, I mean, I would cheat. I would lift the mask out like this. So I've graciously declined. And, you know, hopefully, I don't know, within the next, maybe by the end of the summer, things will calm down and I'll be able to get back, you know, things will get back to a little more quote unquote normal. So, so there I thought, wow, that is absolutely brilliant. That's what we should call the mitzvahs lo saseh. Those are the mitzvahs of refraining, of refrainment. We are supposed to refrain from doing something. So this way it gives the, it doesn't give the false illusion of this being somehow a negative precept. Okay, and by the way, we also translate that word as commandment, which is really also inappropriate. And I'll tell you in a second what I mean by that. Yeah, hold on. Oh, there we go. Oh, I see my brother TJ's here. Thank you, TJ. Yeah. Okay, awesome. So the Hebrew word for mitzvot comes from the word savta, okay, which means to attach. So what does that mean? That the commandments are really, they're phenomena that we partake of, that we do, that enables us to attach ourselves to God Almighty. So to the creator of the whole universe, right? And we have a way to establish a relationship with God Almighty, and how we do that through the mitzvot. So again, I feel like the English translation is sort of, you know, we are commanded, we are thus commanded. You know, yes, sir. So it conveys this notion of somehow like this big general in the sky, you know, laying down the law, and you know, you best be behaving, or else. So they really are, if you want to call them commandments, you know, fine. But the better word, they really are ways of attachment, that we are unable to attach ourselves, to have a relationship with Hashem, with God. One time I coined this thing a long time ago of, you know, it says, as much as we think we can understand or know God, we really can't. Our thoughts are not his thoughts. Our actions are not his actions. You know, whenever we feel like we're getting closer to putting Hashem in a box of definition, it don't really work. So I came up with this thing, calling God the GMO, the great mysterious oneness, the grand mysterious oneness. And but we all know that the beauty of Torah gives us this opportunity to have a very deep, profound personal connection with God. So my first suggestion is we get rid of the notion of the negative mitzvahs, the negative commandments. Okay, so I am I don't know, at some point we're going to have to write into our publishers. I love the fact that how the birds set King Solomon's words of Ecclesiastics from Kohelet to music. Check out, that's your homework for tonight. Listen to the song Turn, 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 and preferably listen to it with on YouTube, some of them will have the words. And so it says a time for embracing and a time to refrain from embracing. So I want to call them, those are the commandments of refraining. Now an amazing story. And the story is, I'm not going to read, if I would read it to you, it would boggle your mind. But I guess it'll only take a minute. So I got to read this to you because this thing is absolutely mind-boggling. So it's just one paragraph. Okay, so you ready for this? Comes from the Gemara Tractate Menachot, which it's on page 44 and on the first side of the page. Okay, so it's in the Gemara Tractate Menachot, and this is this incredible story. Okay, some of you may have heard of this story. Okay, it was taught, Rabbi Nassan said, there is not a single precept in the Torah, even the slightest, whose reward is not enjoyed in this world, and its main reward in the future world, I don't even know how great it is. And he says, go and learn from the mitzvah of tzitzit. Those are the white strings, right, that you wear, you wear in your garment. Some of you may have that. If you wear a four-corner garment, woo, Exhibit A, okay, which, by the way, a friend of mine, he was a science teacher in the public schools. He was on the train one time, and he, hang on a sec. So he was on the train, and he got surrounded by these gang of guys, and and they started to harass him, and they were like, you effing Jew this, you effing Jew that, and it was some gang, and so he says to this day he doesn't even know why he did it. He says to them, do you read the Bible? And they said, yeah, we read the Bible. He says, you know that it says that those who curse the descendants of Abraham will be cursed, and those who bless the descendants of Abraham will be blessed. And then he said he took his tzitzis up, and he said, and these tzitzis that I'm wearing, it equals the numerical equivalent of 613. And that equals all the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. And it has to do with the numerical equivalent of tzitzit, which equals, let's see, Tzadik Yud 100, and then 200 is 600, and then the 8 strings and the 5 knots is 613. And the guys looked at him, they were like, okay, have a good day, sir. And they backed up and left him alone. And he got off the train. He was like, wow, where did that just come from? He has no idea. But they probably thought he was a little bit out of his mind. But so here, because here it's talking about tzitzis. So listen how this saved this particular guy's from doing something, which is pretty wild. So he said, so Reb Nassan says, go and learn from the mitzvah of tzitzis. There was once a man who was very careful about this precept of tzitzis, these white strings that you wear on a four-corner garment. He heard that there was a beautiful harlot in one of the towns by the sea, who, in order to be with her, you needed 400 gold pieces, 400 gold dinar, and then she could be hired out. He sent her the 400 in advance, and he appointed a calendar. He went to his Google Calendar, and he said, I'll be on this particular day. I'll meet you then, and good. And so he sent it with a courier, and a few weeks goes by. The day arrives. He comes and waits at her door. Her handmaid comes out and says, he said, who are you? He says, I sent already my 400 gold pieces in, and this is my name. And the Talmud doesn't tell the guy's name. It doesn't want to mention exactly who it is. But so she goes in, and she says, wait here. She goes in, she tells this beautiful lady, and the lady says, let him come in. When he came in, she prepared for him 7 beds. This is right straight from the Gemara. 6 were made of silver, 1 of gold. And between one bed and the other were steps of silver, but the last were of gold. She went up to the top bed and lay down on it, no clothes. He too went up after her in his desire to sit with her, when all of a sudden the four corners of his garment struck him across the face. Okay, I guess maybe he was taking them off and then bam, he gets slapped by his tzitzis. Whereupon he slips down, he climbs down those steps and sits on the ground. She comes down off the steps, sits on the ground next to him and says, by the Roman capital, I will not leave you alone until you tell me what blemish you saw in me. What is your problem? Like that nobody in the world has ever done this to me. Okay? So he responds back and he says, not by the Roman capital. He swears by what's important to him. He says, by the temple in Jerusalem, never have I seen such a woman as beautiful as you. But there is one precept which God has commanded us. It is called tzitzis. And with regard to it, it says, I am the Lord your God is written twice. And then where it says, I am he who will exact punishment in the future. I am he who will give you reward. Now the tzitzis appeared to me when I took them off and they hit me in the face as these four witnesses testifying against me. She said to me, I will not leave you until you tell me your name, the name of your town, and the name of your teacher, the name of your school in which you study. She was so flabbergasted. She was like, this is like unreal. There is no human being on the planet who could resist me. How is this even possible? He writes it down on a piece of paper. He gives it to her. This is all straight out of the Talmud. All I can say is I wish when I learned Talmud in Morristown that I would have learned these things. So he writes it down, he gives it to her. Thereupon she gets up and within the next few weeks, she divides her estate into three parts. 1/3 for the government, 1/3 to be distributed to the poor, and 1/3 she took with her in her hand. Rashi tells us that, by the way, the 1/3 for the government was as a bribe so she could convert to Judaism. She was so impressed with this guy, and she knew that the government was against it. But you pay people in the government millions of dollars, your bribery worked back then as well. She comes into the house of study of Rabbi Chia and says to him, Master, give me instructions. I want to become a Gioris. I want to convert. So he says, my daughter, perhaps you have set your eyes on one of my students. She takes out the piece of paper, hands it to him, and he reads it. And then he says to her, go and enjoy your acquisition. In other words, you go and convert. So the very bedclothes, this is what the Torah now says, the very bedclothes which she spread for him, for the purpose back then, she now spread out for him lawfully. She became his wife. And this is the reward. Oh, awesome. Chaim. Wow. This is Gittel's homemade remedy. This will keep away the corona. I'm telling you, man. This is lemon juice, ginger, holy malolis, and some honey. What else is in there? And turmeric. Oh, baby. You got any funky germs? This will knock it out of its derriere. Okay, so you can see that. Oh, so it ends by saying, this is the reward of those who fulfill the commandments in this world. And now the Gemara, Reb Nosson ends this Gemara piece by saying, the tractate of the Talmud, by saying, and as far as the reward in the future, I can only imagine how great it is. Okay, so that's from the tractate of Menachos. So the reason I wanted to connect the, let me see if I get my notes over here. So this commandment of we shouldn't like go after, like it says in the Shema, which is where it mentions the commandment of tzitzis, this precept of tzitzis. And in fact, I remember this is one thing that in the movie Crown Heights, if you've ever seen or heard of the movie, they actually recorded this word for word when we were telling about at our first dialogue between the African-American young men and the Hasidic young men. One of the guys starts talking about his tzitzis. And one of the African-Americans said, you just say titties? Like, that's what it sounds like. somebody doesn't know what tzitzis are, they're like, what the heck are you talking about? So he was really surprised. So that is actually in the scene in the movie where they did the movie based on my book, by the way, Sharing Turf. And that was, they took that scene and that quote straight from the book. So I wanted to therefore suggest that these negative, quote unquote, precepts are not negative at all, but they're in fact positive acts. They're simply acts that we do, that they're acts that we might want to do, but we refrain from doing. Okay, like Gittel and I were in the car today, we were heading somewhere, and I hear somebody yelling my name, and it was a friend of mine. And first thing you want to do is give the guy a hug, right? I haven't seen the guy in in months. And you got to stop yourself, right? Ace lahakriv, ace lo lahak. There's a time to embrace. And now we see with the corona, right? This is a time to refrain from embracing. So I will suggest that these commandments should now be called the commandments of refrainment, because it frames it in a much more positive light. And I looked up the numerical equivalent. There's a thing called gematria. Some of you might be familiar with. Every Hebrew letter has a numerical equivalent. Aleph is 1, Beis is 2, Gimel is 3, and all the way up to the last letter, Taf, which is 400. If you look up the numerical equivalent of lo sa'aseh, those are the mitzvahs of not doing. I don't know, can you see that? Let's see. I'll try to get a better light on here. Are you able to see that? Yeah, sort of. Okay, well, let me explain it to you. Lo ta'aseh equals 812. And interestingly enough, it's the same numerical equivalent as the word la'asoto, to do it. So don't do or do it. What do you mean, right? They both have the same numerical equivalent. You could look it up yourself. Both equal 812. And by the way, it's so interesting that 812 also equals, here we just talked about that story, it also equals the numerical equivalent of or hatzitzit, the light of the tzitzit, which is pretty wild. So, in fact, when I saw that, then I remembered, I was like, wow, that's that crazy story about tzitzit in this individual, So what did he refrain from doing? Maybe he was allowed to have relations with this person. Maybe, if she wasn't a married lady, it's not so simple that it's not forbidden. Maybe he was really allowed, but he refrained from. In the Shema, it says, "V'lo tatur acharei levavachem v'acharei nechem." You shouldn't go after what your eyes see and your heart desires. So sometimes we see something, wow, we're like, oh man, that looks pretty awesome. I should like to have that, right? Like, but the Torah is teaching us, no, we're not supposed to follow that. If it has these negative, if it means that we're stealing, that's no good. Like I just saw, there was a video, you might have seen it posted on YouTube, of a Amazon Prime delivery truck was surrounded by a gang. They opened up the back and they stole everything out of the poor guy's delivery truck, right? I'm not saying, unfortunately, people will actually follow. Some people follow the Amazon trucks and they wait till they leave, and then they come and they carry a package. So if you're looking on your cell phone, you see, oh, this is another delivery. And they put some sort of phony baloney package. They put that down and they pick up the Amazon package and then they run away with it. So there's been a lot of clever things people have done to, I've heard of people putting all sorts of, like rotten tomatoes and dog poop inside these boxes to wait for the burglars to come get it. And some people actually do a thing where they actually put an electric charge and you can press a button. So anyhow, you might see something and be like, yeah, I want it. Now I just open up the back of the guy's truck. He might not even know that I'm stealing it right now. Nobody might not even know. But somebody else is going to know, right? The unseen eye watches. The The unheard ear listens. So that's my big change, number one. Okay, my second change that I want to share with you is, and this is also something that bugged me from when I first started getting interested in this whole Jewish business, was the word karbanot, the sacrifices done in the Holy Temple. And it always bothered me that they said the word sacrifices. Okay, now maybe because I grew up on Tarzan, maybe I watched too much Tarzan on TV, right? Where these things are, you know, where people would be sacrificed, it being like a big pot, you know, everybody jumping around, and right, and that you turn into a human sacrifice. But it always conjured up these notion of these sort of weird pagan rituals, sacrifice. But that, you know, the interesting thing is there's no such word in the Hebrew language. The Hebrew word for to sacrifice oneself is mesirat nefesh. Mesira means to give over. You give over your soul, right? And interesting, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, in a very profound discourse, he said that this idea of self-sacrifice today in America is not like it was for, oops, I'm muting you, sorry. It's not like it used to be in the olden days where people would come up to you, put a gun to your head and say, you either convert or we'll kill you. You either worship this idol or we'll kill you. You either you either kill this person or we'll kill you. So we're now not being asked to do that. So now the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe said, what is Mesirat Nefesh today? How do we do self-sacrifice? He said, it's not jumping off the roof of your house. It's not giving up your life. What is it? It's when you have a desire to do something that's not appropriate, that's something that's negative, that's going to lead to some sort of you getting hurt or another person getting hurt, and you refrain from doing that, you control yourself. That is Mesirat Nefesh. That is, it took incredible strength to do that. You controlled yourself, and thus you have done this incredible thing. And it's interesting that in, where do we see this idea? We see it also reflected in Pirkei Avot, in Ethics of the Fathers, where it says in a Mishnah, where it says, who is a warrior? Ezehu Gibor, right? Who is a warrior? Hakovesh es Yitzro, that somebody who is able to conquer, to control over Yitzro, their Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara is sort of the desire within us to engage in something negative, right? It might be fun for the moment. Like this guy I'm sure would have had a great time, something he never would have forgotten. He controlled himself, you know, the tzitzis smacks his face up, he controls himself. And what ends up happening, he gets this great schar. He ends up marrying this woman that everybody on planet Earth basically had a desire for. And he gets her as his wife, right? How? Because he refrained one time. So, and one can only imagine what kind of strength that it took to do that. He could have, you know, the tzitzis hit him in the face when he took him off. He could have grabbed the tzitzis, thrown them on the ground and said, hey, stop bugging me. I ain't interested in what you got to tell me right now, right? You keep your business over there. I keep my business right here. So, yeah, so it's this idea of karbanot. Also, I want to change that word to be offerings. So forget about a lot of the English translations. They translate it, they usually translate the sacrifices brought in the temple. They're not sacrifices, they are offerings. And they are, why is it even, the word karbanot comes from the word karov, which means closeness, kiruv. And so what the whole purpose, again, of a korban was to bring us closer. This is another way for us to come closer, to attach ourselves to the creator of the whole universe, to God. So it was a way to do that. Most of the karbanos, by the way, were basically barbecues. There was only a few of them that were totally consumed on the Mizbeach, on the altar, right? The vast majority, like well over 90%, were a barbecue. Certain portions went on the Mizbeach, a fire came down from the heavens, consumed those pieces that were on there, those burned up in the fire that was on the altar, and the rest of them, you cook and you share with your friends. And some of them, if you didn't share with your friends, you had to get rid of it. You weren't allowed to keep them in the morning, which is very interesting. The Korban Pesach, you had to eat with a group. You had to invite people, otherwise you wouldn't be able to finish it. You can't eat a whole goat. I'm sorry, right? You can't eat a whole sheep. You can't eat a whole cow. But so you got to invite your friends. You got to invite your mishpacha. You got to invite your crew, right? You invite your posse, and when they're there, that's a party. And so you share that with your posse, and you have a good time. So my second thing I wanted to share was that no, they should not be called sacrifices, because it conjures up all these weird pagan rituals. That's not the purpose. The purpose was kirov, karbanot, karov. Through this act, we become closer to the Creator, to God. Okay, so that's my second one. I know it's getting kind of late. The third one, I'll mention, and we'll share this at another time, maybe perhaps the next one, just to go into this. The third one is about rebuking, and how the English translation is totally off, where it says, Hocheach tochiach es amisecha, that comes from Vayikra and the book of Leviticus, and it's always translated, every one that I've seen, it says, you shall surely rebuke. It's a double whammy, not just Hocheach one time, Hocheach tochiach, right? You shall surely rebuke, the English translators go for. And it's very fascinating. We'll save this for our next get-together. Do it Hashem b'simcha,